The church was full. I could hear it through the vestibule walls, the soft murmur of guests settling into pews, the string quartet playing gently, programs being passed from hand to hand. My dress was perfect. My bouquet was still fresh. For the first time in months, everything felt like it was finally coming together. Then the door burst open. My bridesmaid Paige stumbled inside, her face completely drained of color. She was trembling all over, holding her phone out like she had no idea what to do with it. Before I could say a single word, a voice exploded through the church speakers, loud, clear, and horribly familiar. It was Brenna's voice. The guests went instantly quiet. A sharp gasp cut through the air near the front row. The wedding coordinator spun toward the sound panel, reaching fast. I raised my hand slowly. Let it play. My voice came out steady. My hands were shaking behind my bouquet. I stared at the closed door between me and the aisle, took a slow breath and whispered, "My name is Marina Vale, and this is my family." I never thought my wedding day would start like that. But to understand how we got there, I have to go back all the way to the night Brenna Shaw decided to show me exactly who she was. It was 6 months before the wedding. Callum had just proposed, and our families gathered at my parents' house to celebrate. I was wearing the one dress I had saved for something special, a cream wrap dress I truly loved. Brenna arrived late as she always did, making sure all eyes found her first. Within 20 minutes, she was standing beside me with a glass of red wine. She turned suddenly, accidentally, and the glass tipped directly onto my dress. The red soaked in immediately and completely. Everyone laughed awkwardly. My mother said it was just an accident. My stepfather patted Brenna's shoulder reassuringly. But I saw Brenna's eyes before she covered them with an apology. There was a glint in them, sharp, satisfied, and cold. That was Brenna's warm-up act. I just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks after the engagement party, the florist called. She said the deposit on our floral arrangement had never been received. I told her that wasn't possible. I had transferred the money myself and had the bank confirmation to prove it. She paused, then said something that made my stomach drop. "We received an email from your address canceling the order 2 days after the deposit cleared. We refunded it back." I sat completely still for a long moment. Then I asked her to send me a copy. When it arrived in my inbox, I read it twice. The words were polite, organized, and final. The email was signed with my full name, Marina Vale, in exactly the format I always used. I hadn't written it. I hadn't sent it. But whoever did had studied how I wrote. Callum said it was probably just a technical error somewhere. I wanted to believe him. But something deep in my chest said this was not a glitch. This was intentional. And someone knew me well enough to copy me perfectly. When I mentioned the florist situation to the family at dinner that weekend, Brenna was the first one to respond. "That's so stressful," she said, shaking her head with wide, sympathetic eyes. "You're already overwhelmed with planning. You shouldn't have to deal with vendor problems on top of everything else." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Let me help. I can manage the vendor emails going forward. I'm really good at organizing this kind of thing." My mother thought it was a lovely idea. My stepfather nodded along. Even Callum said it would take some pressure off me. I hesitated. Something about her offer felt too quick, too smooth. But I had no clear reason to say no, so I agreed. Brenna pulled me into a hug before I could second-guess myself. She held on just a little longer than felt natural. And just before she let go, I felt the smallest change in her posture. A softening that felt more like relief than warmth. Over my shoulder, I later realized she had been smiling. A week after Brenna took over the vendor emails, I noticed something strange about Callum's mother. Mrs. Winters had always been warm with me, not overwhelming but genuinely kind. She came to our first family dinner without being asked twice. She sent me photos of flower arrangements she thought I'd like. But suddenly she was different. She stopped returning my calls. She declined the dress-fitting invitation with a short voicemail that sounded stiff and rehearsed. When I ran into her outside Callum's apartment building, she gave me a quick nod and looked away immediately. No smile. No hug. Just a wall where a warm person used to be. I tried not to read too much into it. People got busy. People had difficult weeks. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation somewhere. Then I sent her a simple message asking if we could have lunch together. Just the two of us. I wanted to clear whatever air had come between us. Her reply came that evening. Short, cold, and final. I know the truth. 3 words. No explanation. The kind of message that closes a door completely. I showed Callum his mother's message that same night. He read it twice, exhaled slowly, and sat down on the edge of the couch. She called me this afternoon, he said. She told me she received screenshots. Messages, photos. She said they showed you had been seeing someone else. The room felt like it tilted sideways. Callum, I don't believe it, he said quickly. I want you to know that first. I don't believe it. But I need to understand where they came from, because they looked convincing enough that she didn't question them at all. I sat beside him, my hands trembling in my lap. I had no explanation. I had never been unfaithful. But whoever created those screenshots knew enough about my life to make them look real. We sat together for a long time thinking. I kept my eyes on the floor. Then the door opened. Brenna stepped into the room, took one long look at me with tears on my face, and said absolutely nothing. She just stood there and watched. 2 days later, I was walking down the hallway of my parents' house when I heard Brenna's voice coming from the guest room. The door was slightly open. I stopped. Relax, she was saying, her voice low and completely calm. She's falling apart exactly the way we planned. Callum is starting to pull back a little, and his mother is totally convinced. I pressed my back flat against the wall and held completely still. Give it another week, she continued. Once the vendors are all backed out and his family is finished with her, there won't even be a wedding left to ruin. She laughed, short, quiet, and cold enough to stop my breathing. Then she said my name. Marina thinks this is about bad luck. She's blaming herself for everything. A pause. Then softly, she'll lose Callum first. The rest will follow on its own. I didn't move for a long time after the call ended. I stood in that hallway with my hand pressed to the wall and stared at nothing. For the first time, I understood the full size of what I was dealing with. That night, Callum came over. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with his hands folded, and asked me quietly to explain the screenshots. Not because he believed them, he kept saying that, but because his mother was pulling away from him too, and the strain was starting to show in ways he couldn't ignore. I cried. I told him I had never been unfaithful to him, not once. I told him I had no idea where the images had come from. He reached across the table and held both my hands and said he was choosing to trust me completely. But something is happening, he said firmly. And we need to figure out what. I almost told him about the phone call I had overheard. But I stopped. Without solid proof, an accusation against Brenna would look exactly like the jealousy and paranoia she had probably already described to people. She would use it immediately. So instead I looked at him steadily and said, "Someone wants to destroy us. I think it's Brenna." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Show me what you have." The next morning, a woman from the wedding venue's accounting department called me. She said they had received a request, supposedly submitted by me, to withdraw the full remaining balance from the venue's payment account. "We almost processed it," she said carefully, but something about the tone felt unusual, so I flagged it before doing anything. I asked her to forward me the request. When it arrived, I read every word. The sentence structure was familiar. The phrasing was polite and precise. The sign-off was clean: Marina Vale, full name, no errors. I pulled up the florist cancellation from my saved folder and laid both emails side by side on my screen. Same tone, same rhythm, same way of ending each sentence. Identical structure before the signature. My hand stopped shaking. I felt something change inside me. Not fear anymore, but sharp, clear focus. This was one person. One careful, deliberate person who had studied how I communicated and used it against me like a weapon. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I typed one word across the top. Sabotage. I spent that entire evening printing emails, saving forwarded messages, and organizing everything by date. The florist cancellation. The venue withdrawal request. The growing list of strange vendor calls. I made a second copy of everything and locked it in the glove compartment of my car. I also wrote out a full timeline, every strange thing that had happened since the engagement, every problem that had appeared just after Brenna offered to help, every moment I had let her in and something went wrong directly after. Written out in order, the pattern was impossible to miss. But I still felt uncertain, not about Brenna, I was nearly certain now, but about myself. About how many times I had chosen peace over truth simply because conflict felt more damaging than quietly absorbing the hurt. About how many times I had called her behavior an accident because the alternative was harder to face. I told myself that seeing a pattern clearly was not the same as being dramatic. I closed the folder, made tea, and waited for the next thing to break. I didn't have to wait long. The cake designer called the following morning. The baker's name was Claire, and she was apologetic and kind as she explained what had happened. She said a young woman had come into the shop 2 days earlier, introducing herself as my sister and asking to change the wedding cake design entirely. The replacement she requested was plain and impersonal, nothing like what Callum and I had chosen together during our tasting appointment. I almost went ahead with it, Claire said honestly. But she kept calling you my sister in this very specific way, and something about it just didn't sit right. So I called your number directly before making any changes. I thanked her and asked her to describe the woman. She described Brenna exactly, the hair, the posture, the particular way she smiled while she talked. She seemed very determined, Claire added carefully. I got the sense this wasn't her first time trying to change something about your wedding. I added the date, time, and every detail to my folder. Then I sat quietly with the reality that Brenna had walked into a shop and impersonated me to a stranger's face, without hesitating, without flinching. That level of boldness was something I hadn't fully prepared myself for. While I was building my documentation, my mind kept returning to the engagement dinner, a moment I had dismissed at the time but could no longer explain away. Callum and I had argued 2 nights before the party. It was small and quickly resolved. A disagreement about whether to invite a former coworker of his who made me uncomfortable. We talked it through, reached a decision, and moved forward. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. But at the engagement dinner, in front of both families and a table full of friends, Brenna brought it up casually while we were all eating. She smiled pleasantly and said, "Marina, didn't you and Callum have some kind of disagreement about the guest list recently? Something about one of his work friends." The table went quiet. Callum looked at me. I felt heat rise in my face. I had never told Brenna about that conversation. Not a single word. She had been listening to private moments and storing them carefully. And she had used one at the exact moment it would cause the most discomfort with the least possible evidence against her. She had been doing this for months. Callum started paying closer attention after I shared what I had been collecting. He didn't say much yet. I think he was still processing how deep it ran. But he was watching Brenna carefully now. One afternoon, he came by his parents' house to drop something off and surprisingly met and overheard Brenna talking to his mother in the kitchen. "Brenna must have called my mom and she invited her over," Callum said. He told me about it that evening, his jaw set and tight. Brenna had told Mrs. Winters that Marina had been secretly crying over an ex-boyfriend, that she brought him up all the time, and that deep down she wasn't fully certain about the marriage. She delivered it gently, in the voice of someone sharing a difficult truth out of genuine care. Callum stepped into the kitchen and told Brenna clearly and calmly that none of it was true. Brenna blinked, apologized with perfectly rehearsed confusion, and said she must have misunderstood something somewhere along the way. Mrs. Winters looked between them and said nothing at all. But when she left, she hugged Brenna at the door and did not hug her own son. She still believed Brenna completely. The DJ contacted me on a Tuesday afternoon. He said he had received a message asking him to replace my entire wedding song playlist with a generic set he used for corporate functions. He had almost updated the file before something made him pause. "I just wanted to confirm directly with you first," he said. I told him to keep the original playlist and not accept any future changes unless they came from me personally, over the phone, with a 4-digit confirmation code we agreed on right then. After we hung up, I asked him to forward the message he had received. He sent it within the hour. I recognized the writing style immediately, but this time there was something more concrete. The DJ had replied before realizing it was suspicious, and the response had come back from a phone number. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I opened my contacts. It was Brenna's number. Not a fake account. Not a forwarded address. Her actual personal phone number, the same one I had saved for 2 years. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. I decided to confront her privately. I didn't want to pull the families into it yet, not without being completely prepared. I asked Brenna to meet me for coffee, the way sisters sometimes did. She arrived cheerful and relaxed, stirring her drink like we were just catching up on an ordinary week. I laid a small selection of documents on the table between us. Not everything, just the florist cancellation email, the venue withdrawal request, and the DJ message with her phone number clearly visible at the bottom. I watched her face as she looked at each one. She didn't flinch. She shook her head slowly, clicked her tongue and said quietly, "Marina, someone is clearly trying to make me look bad. I have no idea who would do this to both of us." Then she looked straight into my eyes and said, "You're reading too far into things. All this wedding pressure is getting to you. Honestly, I'm a little worried about you." Her voice was warm. Her eyes were completely steady. For one awful moment I nearly believed her. Nearly. That night, sitting alone, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A voice memo. I almost didn't open it. I sat with the notification on my screen for a full minute before pressing play. It was Brenna's voice. She was talking quickly, laughing lightly between sentences, describing everything she had done as though she were recapping a game she had just won. The florist cancellation email. The fake screenshots sent to Mrs. Winters. The visit to the cake shop. The DJ playlist switch. The stories planted carefully in Callum's family. She mentioned the venue withdrawal attempt and laughed about how close it had come to going all the way through. "She'll never see it coming," she said near the end. "By the time the wedding arrives, there won't be anything left worth saving." The recording ended. I sat very still. Then I played it again from the beginning, and once more after that. It sounded like she had been recording a voice memo to send to an accomplice, and had accidentally sent it to the wrong contact entirely. She had no idea I had it. I saved it in 3 separate places immediately without moving from my chair. The wedding was 4 days away. I should have felt relieved holding that recording. Instead, I felt a different kind of fear settle in. If I played it for the family immediately, Brenna would deny everything. She would claim it was edited, spliced together, taken out of context. The entire final week before the wedding would become a loud, exhausting battlefield. I would walk into my own ceremony carrying that weight on my shoulders. I didn't want that. I wanted to protect the day, for Callum, for myself, for what it was supposed to mean to both of us. So I saved the voice memo to my phone, backed it up to my email, and uploaded it to a private cloud folder. I told myself I would only use it if Brenna crossed a line so clear and undeniable that there was no other choice. Then the night before the wedding, I lay in bed unable to sleep. I heard movement outside my door. Then laughter, Brenna's laughter, low and private and pleased, coming from just outside my room. She was still enjoying every bit of this. A knock came about an hour later. It was Callum. He must have sensed something was wrong, because he sat beside me on the floor without asking for an explanation first. He just let the quiet settle around us. Then he asked softly if I was okay. I looked at him, at this man who had chosen to believe me when he had every reason to doubt, and I almost told him everything. The recording was right there on my phone. I could have pressed play and handed it to him in 30 seconds, but I stopped myself. I wanted him to walk into that church tomorrow with a completely full heart. I didn't want our wedding morning clouded by confrontation and fresh anger. He deserved to smile when he saw me at the end of that aisle. He had earned that moment just as much as I had. So I held his hand and told him I was nervous, which was entirely true. He squeezed my hand and said tomorrow was going to be beautiful. I made my decision quietly, without saying it out loud. If Brenna crossed any line at all tomorrow, I would let the truth speak entirely for itself. The morning of the wedding started with small fires everywhere. The wrong flowers arrived. Ivory roses instead of the cream garden roses Callum and I had specifically chosen. The chair arrangement in the ceremony hall was laid out in a configuration we had officially changed 3 weeks earlier. The order of service programs were missing their last page entirely. Each problem standing alone was manageable. Together they told a story I already knew by heart. I fixed every issue calmly and quietly. I called the florist directly and used the backup bloom she had set aside after our earlier conversation. I directed the venue staff on the chair layout myself. I had the programs reprinted at the front reception desk. The coordinator kept watching me with a look of quiet admiration, like she couldn't quite believe how composed I was managing to stay. Inside, I was running through every possible way the day could still fall apart. Then Mrs. Winters arrived at the church entrance. She stood straight-backed and unsmiling, scanning the room slowly with the cool, distant expression of someone who had already made up her mind about everything. She looked straight through me as if I wasn't standing right there. The ceremony was 8 minutes away. I was in the vestibule with Paige and 2 other bridesmaids doing final adjustments, a veil pin, a lip color touch-up, one last look in the small mirror propped against the wall. My bouquet was in my hands. I was almost ready. Earlier that morning, Paige had been helping the sound technician organize the music cues through the church's speaker system. She had borrowed my phone briefly because she couldn't locate the right audio file on her own device. She had returned the phone shortly after, and I had slipped it into the small interior pocket of my bridal bag without thinking much about it. But she hadn't fully closed the audio app. Later, Paige would tell me she must have brushed the screen when she handed me the bag. A single tap on the wrong file. The voice memo, Brenna's full recorded confession, was the last file I had opened on that phone. It began playing at full volume through every speaker in the church. I heard the collective gasp from inside before I fully understood what was happening. Then Brenna's voice filled every inch of that building. Paige went completely pale. She lunged for my bag, reaching for the phone to stop it. The coordinator rushed toward the sound panel. A bridesmaid covered her mouth with both hands. Everyone was moving at once except me. I stood completely still. I listened to Brenna's voice describing the fake screenshots, laughing about the DJ playlist swap, casually detailing how she had visited the cake shop in my name. I heard her say she'll never see it coming to whoever she had meant to send that memo to, and I made my decision. No. My voice came out calm and clear. Leave it. Paige stopped mid-reach. The coordinator froze. Every person in the vestibule turned and looked at me. Every person in that church deserves to hear this, I said steadily. Every person who believed those screenshots. Every person she told her stories to. I looked at Paige directly. Let it play. A single beat of silence followed. Then from inside the church came the sharp sound of heels hitting the floor hard and fast as the side door swung open. Brenna stormed into the vestibule with her face completely twisted. Turn that OFF, she screamed. I stepped to the side and let her voice keep playing through those speakers. The recording was nearly 2 minutes long. By the time the final second played out, the entire church had heard every detail. The vendor sabotage, the fake emails signed in my name, the visit to the cake shop where she pretended to be my sister, every poison story she had fed to Mrs. Winters, and every screenshot she had created herself from nothing. Brenna tried 3 separate times to reach the sound panel. The coordinator stepped gently into her path each time. Brenna reached for my bag. Paige moved in front of her without a word. I watched all of it without moving a single step. When the recording finally ended, the church was completely silent for one long moment. Then I walked through the vestibule doors and stepped into the aisle. The guests saw me. Some were crying. Some were still frozen in shock. Mrs. Winters sat in the front row with one hand pressed hard against her chest and her eyes wide open. Callum stood at the altar. He had heard every word. His expression wasn't angry. It was something quieter and deeper. The look of a man finally understanding the full shape of what had been happening around him. He reached out his hand toward me. Callum spoke first. He turned to face the guests and said, clearly and without any trembling in his voice, that everything the recording had just revealed was fully documented and would be handled properly going forward. He thanked every person who had been deceived for still being there. He asked them to trust what they had just heard with their own ears. Then he turned to face Brenna directly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply told her that she was no longer welcome in this ceremony, or in their lives going forward. Mrs. Winters stood from her seat. She walked directly to me, took both of my hands in hers and said she was deeply sorry. Her voice was shaking. She said she should have asked me directly before believing a single word of what she had been told. Brenna was still standing in the aisle, her eyes darting between every face in the room. Her father, my stepfather, walked slowly toward her, his expression heavy with something between sorrow and shame. He took her gently but firmly by the arm. She walked out with him, saying over and over through tears, "You've ruined my life." The church watched her go without a sound. After the doors closed behind her, The church held its breath for one quiet moment. Then Callum looked at me with steady eyes. "Do you still want to get married today?" I almost laughed out loud. I pressed my hand flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat, calm and steady under my palm. "I didn't come this far to leave without marrying you," I said. The officiant stepped forward. The string quartet began again, softly and carefully. Somewhere in the middle of the pews, a single person started clapping. Then another until the whole church was filled with it. We didn't have a perfect ceremony after that. I cried more than I had planned to. Callum's voice broke once during his vows at a moment neither of us expected. The flower arrangement in the corner was still slightly wrong. None of it mattered in the way I had once imagined it would. What mattered was that we stood in the complete, unfiltered truth of everything that had happened. All the sabotage, all the doubt, all the months of quiet damage. And we chose each other anyway. Not in anger. Not as a statement. Just in love. When the officiant said the final words and Callum kissed me, the applause was not simply for a wedding. It was for something that had survived. In the weeks that followed, Brenna's carefully constructed world began to come apart quietly and completely. The friends she had confided pieces of her plan to pulled back once they understood the full scope of what she had done. Family dinners became smaller. Calls she expected stopped coming. The version of herself she had built and protected for years, the caring, concerned, devoted stepsister, had been replaced in everyone's memory by the sound of her own laughing voice describing her sabotage in vivid detail. No amount of explaining could undo that. She sent me one message about 3 weeks after the wedding. It was half apology and half justification, which meant it was neither. I read it once. I did not reply. Callum and I set our boundaries simply and honestly. They were not built from anger. They were built from truth. Brenna would not be given access to our home, our events, or our daily lives unless a real foundation of trust existed between us. That foundation did not exist. It was possible it never would. I did not celebrate what happened to her. I felt no need to. She had recorded her own confession. She had walked herself out of that church. She had built and then destroyed everything entirely on her own. All I did was press play.